I never imagined that such a banal moment could turn into something so intense. It all started with a simple carelessness. So I was in my room, changing myself without haste, without thinking about anything but the touch of income against my skin. That was a moment of mine without worry, until the door suddenly opened. My eyes found his. Daniel, my nephew. Time seemed to stop. My heart fired. He stayed there, not knowing what to do. I saw the surprise in his eyes, but also something more, something that made me disconcerted. His face turned red. He mumbled an apology and left. As fast as he entered, that should have ended there. It's a simple accident, an embarrassing moment to be forgotten. But the problem is that it is not over. In the following days, he began to act differently. At first, I thought it was just ashamed, but I soon realized I had something beyond that. The long eyes, the shy smiles, the small gestures that made me hold my breath. I should ignore, pretend nothing happened. But desire has a strange way of playing with us, and that's how it all started. I tried to forget, follow life normally. But after that day, everything seemed different. The scene was coming back in my head. His gaze, the way he observed me, the shock mixed with something I should not have noticed. I told myself it was a thing in my head, that nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Yes, in the following days, I tried to act as if nothing had happened. But he doesn't. He looked at me differently, a fixed, attentive look, analyzing every detail of my body. The tension was subtle, but real. Then came the second shock. I was in the kitchen, taking a glass of water, when I realized that he was watching me from afar. First, I thought it was a coincidence, but when I turned and caught him staring at me, without even blinking, I felt a shiver up my skin. "Is everything okay?" Pretending disinterest. He took a second to answer. He swallowed, took a deep breath, and smiled. "Okay." But the way he said, the tone of his voice, had something there from that day. The looks became more frequent. I pretended not to realize, but every time I felt your eyes on me, my body reacted. A strange heat, a mixture of guilt and curiosity. Until one night, something different happened. I was on the couch, short pajama, watching TV, when he passed me and stopped for a second more than usual. Her arm went back to mine, and I felt the warmth of his skin. A subtle touch, but it was in the air. It was not an accident. It was not unintentionally. He was testing the boundaries. And the worst, my body noticed before my mind. My heart accelerated. My breath was irregular. The next day, he called me to talk. Only the two of us, without anyone around. He said he wanted to clarify what happened. But the way he spoke, how I looked inside my eyes, showed that there was much more behind those words. "Have you been uncomfortable?" His question came straight, bluntly. I could simply say, yes, end the subject, and move on. But I hesitated. He noticed that the silence was enough for him to understand the answer. I didn't say aloud. The tension between us was at the height. A game of provocations, not spoken. There was no longer a silent game. It was an invitation after that. Conversation, everything changed. If before there was a silent game between us, now it seemed that he wanted to increase his intensity. The eyes were even more straightforward. The moments together carried a different weight. I felt the energy. In the air, a tension that seemed to grow every day. It no longer avoided proximity. On the contrary, one day we were in the room watching TV. I felt when he sat next to me, too close. The heat of his body reached me, as if it were an electric current passing through my skin. He pretended to be distracted, but I realized the small movements, the way that stirred the hair, which adjusted the position on the couch to be a little closer. Everything was calculated. In another moment, I went to get something in the kitchen, and when I turned, he was there, stopped at the door, watching me in silence. "Do you need anything?" I asked, trying to look natural. He gave a corner smile. "I was just looking." Swallow dry. He knew exactly what he was doing. Over time, the touches became more frequent. Small to brush with skin, a touch on the waist as it passes, a light length hands that lasted a second more than it should. Small teasing that made me hold my breath. I needed to stop that. But at the same time, I didn't want to. Desire grows in silence, in what cannot be said. And he was enjoying every second of this game. Until one day, he broke the rules. I was on the porch, looking at nothing, trying to organize my thoughts. He approached from behind, his presence burning against my skin. "Do you think about it too?" His voice came low, almost a whisper. My body crashed. What should I answer? I felt his breathing nearby. The heat, he didn't touch me, but was close enough to make me feel every detail of that moment. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, trying to keep the composure. He laughed low, a laugh that made me even more restless. I think you know. His words were in the air like a provocation. I should leave, end that game, but I stayed. He moved slowly, without haste, as if testing every reaction of mine. His gaze slipped down my face, looking for a sign of resistance, but I said nothing. The silence was deafening. My heart beat hard. I felt he was in control of the situation, and at that moment, I knew there was no return. I knew this was going too far. Every look, every subtle touch, every moment of heavy silence between us made it clear that we were crossing a dangerous line, but I didn't expect him to be so straightforward. It was late night. I was in the room, lying down, trying to ignore everything that was happening. But then I heard a light knock on the door. Can I come in? My first reaction was to say no, but I hesitated. It's late, Daniel. What is it? He went slowly, closed the door behind him, and stayed there looking at me. His gaze was different, determined. I need to say something. I sat on the bed, trying to pretend it was nothing much. But the truth is that my heart was fired. He took a deep breath. I don't stop thinking about you. My throat dried up. The silence took over the room. Daniel, that's not right. I know, he replied, approaching slowly. But I can't avoid since that day. Since I saw you that way, I can't look at you as before. I wanted to say something, push him away, put an end to it. But the words did not. Kamal, he continued, I always admired you, always found you amazing. But now it's different. I want you. The way he said that, without hesitation, without fear, my body reacted before my mind. A shiver traveled my skin, and I felt the heavy breath taking over the environment. This can't happen, I said, more to me than to him. He approached another step. Why not? I had no answer. He smiled in the corner, realizing my silence. If you wanted to stop, I would have already sent. The boldness in his voice made me lose my air for a moment. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say he was wrong, but my eyes said something else. He sat next to me, so close that I smelled. I felt the warmth of his skin, a light touch in my hand, a trace of hesitation. If you tell me to stop, I stop. I could push him away. I could get out of there, end it. But I stayed. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. I felt his breathing nearby. My thoughts were a mess. Renata. He whispered my name slowly, savoring each syllable. My body responded before my reason. A shiver traveled my skin. My heart fired. I wanted to fight it, but at the same time, I wanted to lose myself in temptation. And at that moment, I knew there was no return. After that night, nothing more was the same. Daniel no longer tried to hide. On the contrary, it looked like he liked to test my limits. The eyes had become more intense, the most malicious smiles, the boldest touches. He made a point of approaching, of leaving his presence marked on me. And me, I tried to resist, but every movement of him made my body react. The worst was when we were alone. He found any excuse to get close, to touch my skin, to whisper something. In my ear, one afternoon, I was in the kitchen, taking a glass of water when I felt him behind me. Want help? He asked, but his voice said something else. Before I answered, I felt his warmth approaching. The hot breath against my neck. My whole body shivered. You're playing with fire, I muttered, trying to keep control. He smiled. And you're not running. My heart accelerated. I walked away. But he knew. I knew that, no matter how much I struggled against it, a part of me liked the game. The following days were even worse. He passed me and let his hand touch my arm, my waist, my thigh lightly, as if it were unintentionally. But it wasn't. Sometimes he looked at me as if waiting for something, as if I knew that at any moment I could give in. And the truth was, inside, I had already given in. One night we were watching TV. The room was silent. The low light. I felt his presence beside me, the heat of the body, the tension in the air. He leaned forward, supporting his elbows on his knees. The movement made your arm brush on my leg on purpose. I should have walked away, but I did nothing. If I kissed you now, would you stop me? The question was a whisper, but sounded like a scream inside my head. I no longer knew where the line was right and wrong. He just knew that every day he pushed her farther. "You say nothing," he teased, his eyes fixed on mine. My mouth dried up, because I don't know what to say. He laughed softly, the sound full of confidence, so I already have my answer. My body was locked. Wanted to deny it, I wanted to say that it couldn't continue. But the truth is that I didn't want him to stop. And at that moment, I realized that it wasn't just he who was playing with fire. I was too, and increasingly close to the limit. After that night, my head became a whirlwind. I needed to put an end to it. But how? Every time I was alone, the moments between us returned to my mind. The way he looked at me, boldness in words, confidence in every gesture. And worst of all, the way my body responded. It was like one side of me shout to stop, while the other pulled me into the abyss. I started to walk away. It avoided being alone with him. I tried to act naturally, but I knew Daniel realized. He noticed. "Of course you noticed, Dot." Each time I fled, he approached. "Okay." Each time I tried to ignore him, he made a point of remembering. "Why are you avoiding me?" Question caught me off guard. "We were in the room, just both of us. It's nothing." I answered too fast. He approached, crossed his arms, and analyzed me. Then he looks at me in the eyes and says he feels nothing. My throat dried up. I wanted to say, I wanted to end that. But the words did not come out. The silence was my answer. He smiled. "That's what I thought." My heart accelerated. How was that? Gone so far? When did I lose control? I spent the rest of the night locked in my room trying to put my thoughts in place, but it was impossible. I'd already crossed the line the moment I allowed it to start. The next day, I tried to act normally, but everything was different. Daniel noticed my hesitation. During breakfast, he sat next to me, intentionally too close. Her leg brushed on mine under the table, and he didn't move away. My body reacted before my mind, smiled in the corner. I knew I was slowly disarming me. I needed to react, needed to get away once and for all. But part of me didn't want to. That night, I locked myself in the room. I stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what was happening to me. I knew the right thing was to stop. But then, why could I not? I started to remember every detail. Of the long eyes, the whispered words, his touch on my skin. My body burned, just thinking. I didn't want to admit, but the truth was one. I wasn't fighting Daniel, I was fighting myself. I was on the edge of the cliff. And worse, you might have already fallen. I thought I was able to hide, that no one realized what was happening between us. But I was wrong. Daniel's mother began to notice. At first, they were just suspicious looks, small comments loose. But over time, it was clear that she felt something strange in the air. One day, as I prepared dinner, she approached, watching me closely. "You've been different lately," he said, with a curious tone. My heart fired. "It must be something in your head," I said, trying to look carefree. But she didn't seem convinced. And then came the worst. That night, after dinner, she called me to talk. "I want to ask you something." He started staring at me. I felt a cold in my pimple. "Daniel walks strange. Did you notice something different about him?" My body crashed. I knew any exaggerated reaction would give me. I didn't realize anything. Lied. She was silent for a moment, studying me, analyzing every detail. And then he said something that made me lose the floor. "If you have something happening, you would tell me, right?" That was a warning. I needed to make a decision before it was too late. In the following days, my paranoia only increased. Each time Daniel's mother was looking at me, I felt like being examined. Did she know? Did it suspect something? Daniel, on the other hand, didn't seem to worry. He kept acting normally, as if nothing was happening. It pissed me off. "You need to be careful," I whispered to him one day, when we were alone in the kitchen. He smiled. "Why are you scared?" My breath failed. Yes, I was afraid. Not just what could happen if we were discovered, but what was already happening inside me. That night, I went to the room earlier. I locked the door. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. But then I heard footsteps outside. My heart accelerated. Someone stopped in front of my door. I held my breath. The doorknob turned slowly. I felt my whole body freeze. The door did not open. I heard a sigh outside. Then passes, walks away. I closed my eyes and tried to calm my breath. But there, at that moment, I knew I was being observed. And this time I didn't know who. After that night, Nothing more seemed the same. That feeling of being observed was not past. It was like a weight constantly on me. I knew I needed to solve it, one way or another. Daniel didn't help. He kept teasing, testing my limits, waiting for me to give in, and I was so close to doing that. But then something inside me shouted, could not that way. Not with that risk. I spent the night clear, rolling in bed, trying to find a way out. But the truth was simple. If I didn't end it now, I couldn't stop later. That morning, when he tried to get closer again, I was firm. This has to stop. He looked at me, surprised. Why? Because it's not right. And because I know that if we continue, someone will be injured. I was silent for a moment. Then he sighed and looked away. So that's it, my heart weighed. But I knew there was no other way. And that, he ran his tongue over his lips as if he was deciding something. Are you sure? I took a deep breath. Yes, I had. But saying aloud was something else. I have. He laughed, low, disbelieving. It does not seem. I walked away. I couldn't let him dispose of me again. You want me to stop, but you don't want me to leave. Swallowed dry. Daniel, ... He stepped back. I understood. The silence between us became heavy. Then he sighed and smiled lightly. If that's what you want, ... But I saw it in his eyes. That was not over. Is it going to be like this then? He asked, without looking away. I nodded, even without being sure. Okay. He passed me slowly, without looking back. When the door closed, I felt my body crumble. The silence filled the room. My heart was hitting strong, but it was no longer desire. Was it a relief or regret? I ran my hands over my face. Everything seemed so wrong, but at the same time, right? I wanted to believe that everything would end there, that we would move on as if nothing had happened. But a part of me knew it wouldn't be so simple, and that deep down, the story was not over yet. Maybe never ended. The days passed, but nothing returned to normal. I tried to follow my life, to act as if nothing had happened. But deep down, everything inside me was different. Daniel has changed too. He didn't insist anymore, but I felt his look when I thought I wasn't realizing it. I felt the tension in the air, the silence, full of non-said words. And worst of all, I missed. Lack of provocation, game adrenaline. But it was better that way. At least that's what I repeated to myself every night before bed. The weeks have passed. The routine came back. But inside me, the fire did not go out. I pretended yes, till one day we met alone again. The silence was suffocating. Do you still think about it? He asked. My breath failed. No. He laughed at the corner. Liar. Kai turned my face, trying to ignore the shiver on the skin. This is over, Daniel. He approached a step. He is sure. My heart fired. The distance between us seemed shorter than before. Okay, my hands trembled. I wanted to believe yes, but some stories do not end. Just are silent, waiting for the right time to start over.